When humanity first joined the galactic stage, they were met with curiosity, skepticism, and, in some cases, outright hostility. Yet, despite being a relatively young species, they adapted quickly, forging alliances and negotiating treaties with civilizations that had existed for millennia. They spoke of peace, cooperation, and diplomacy. But there was one unsettling detail that no one could ignore: human diplomatic vessels were heavily armed. Most species viewed diplomacy as a sacred practice, built on trust and mutual respect. Their ambassadorial ships were symbolic, elegant, unarmored, and reliant on goodwill. A show of faith. But humanity? Their diplomatic vessels bristled with point defense systems, missile arrays, and reinforced hulls. Some had the firepower of frontline warships. At first, the Galactic Council dismissed it as insecurity, a primitive species clinging to outdated survival instincts. Others saw it as an insult, a sign that humanity lacked faith in the very alliances they were forming. A few called it provocative, suggesting it implied hostility rather than peace. But when questioned, human ambassadors always gave the same unsettling answer: "It's just standard procedure." This response only deepened the mystery. No other species followed such a practice. Some governments even proposed sanctions, arguing that arming diplomatic vessels violated the spirit of interstellar cooperation. But humanity remained firm. Their ambassadors would never travel unprotected. Rumors spread across the stars. Some believed humans were hiding a dark secret, that they had experienced something horrific before entering the galactic stage, something so terrible that they would never again send an unarmed envoy. Others speculated they were simply paranoid, their species still scarred by the wars of their early history. Then came the more unsettling theories, whispers that humanity knew something the rest of the galaxy didn't. Something they refused to say out loud. To understand why humanity arms its diplomatic vessels, one must first understand its history. Unlike most species, whose diplomacy evolved in times of peace, humanity's diplomacy was forged in war. Throughout their history, negotiations were rarely conducted from a position of absolute trust. Every major peace agreement, every ceasefire, every treaty was written under the shadow of conflict. Empires throughout human history knew one truth: diplomacy without strength is meaningless. The Romans understood this when they sent envoys backed by legions. The great powers of Earth carried out gunboat diplomacy, ensuring their emissaries were protected by military might. Even in the modern era, humanity's most effective negotiations were conducted under the implicit understanding that force was always an option. But nothing shaped their interstellar diplomacy more than first contact. The first species they met was not a benevolent ally, it was a predator. Humanity extended a hand, and it was nearly severed. The Waitari incident became the defining moment of human diplomatic doctrine. A peaceful delegation, sent unarmed to establish relations, was massacred. Not out of malice, but because the Waitari saw an unarmed envoy as a weak prey species, unworthy of recognition. That was the last time humans sent a defenseless diplomat. From that moment, they rewrote the rules. No more fragile peace envoys. No more blind faith in the goodwill of others. Every ambassador would travel with an escort. Every diplomatic vessel would be capable of withstanding an attack. If humanity was to negotiate peace, it would be on their own terms, not as victims, but as equals. The Galactic Council dismissed this as paranoia. But humanity didn't care. Their stance was simple: diplomacy is only possible when survival is guaranteed. The skepticism surrounding humanity's armed diplomats persisted until the day everything changed. The Soluvian Peace Summit was meant to be a turning point in galactic diplomacy. Over 30 species gathered on a neutral world, bringing their most esteemed ambassadors to negotiate long-standing disputes. It was a symbol of unity, a testament to progress. Humanity arrived with the HSS Resolute, a diplomatic cruiser that looked more like a battleship. As always, they were mocked. Other species called it excessive, paranoid, even offensive. After all, this was a peace summit. What possible threat could there be? Then the attack came. A rogue Soluvian faction, long opposed to the Council, had been waiting for this moment. As the summit reached its peak, their fleet descended from orbit, opening fire on the unarmed diplomatic vessels docked below. The first few minutes were pure chaos, entire delegations wiped out before they could react. The attackers broadcast their message across all channels: the old order was dead, and diplomacy had failed. Panic spread. Most species had brought no protection. Their ships were obliterated in moments. Their envoys were hunted through the halls of the summit chambers. Pleas for negotiation were met with gunfire. The Galactic Council, for all its authority, was powerless. Except for one delegation. As the Soluvian warships turned their weapons toward the human vessel, they met resistance. The HSS Resolute activated its defense grid, launching countermeasures and cutting through the attackers with precise, calculated fire. When the ground forces stormed the chambers, they were met not by fleeing diplomats, but by armed human marines who fought their way through the chaos, rescuing trapped officials and securing escape routes. By the time reinforcements arrived, the battle was over. The Soluvian faction had been eradicated, their coup crushed. And the only reason any high-ranking officials survived was because the humans had expected it. The aftermath was grim. Entire species had lost their leadership in a single night. The Galactic Council, for the first time, truly understood what humanity had been preparing for. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't arrogance. It was experience. Because unlike the rest of the galaxy, humanity had always known that peace was never guaranteed. The Soluvian massacre changed everything. The illusion of safety was shattered. The Galactic Council could no longer dismiss humanity's methods as paranoia; they were a necessity. Some species mourned their losses. Others seethed with anger, blaming themselves for their naivety. But all of them knew one thing: humanity had been right. Within weeks, diplomatic protocols across the galaxy began to shift. Species that once prided themselves on sending unarmed emissaries started re-evaluating their approach. Governments that once condemned humanity's methods were now requesting human escorts for their own diplomats. No longer was an armed envoy seen as an insult. It was seen as wisdom. Humanity, once mocked for its insistence on strength, was now leading the way in interstellar diplomacy. The Human Diplomatic Corps became one of the most respected institutions in the galaxy, not just for their negotiation skills, but for their ability to protect those who sought peace. The phrase "never unarmed" became more than a human policy; it became a galactic standard. At a gathering of ambassadors months after the attack, a young alien diplomat approached a human envoy with a question. "Did you know the attack was coming?" The human smiled, but there was no joy in it. "No. But we knew something would, eventually." The diplomat hesitated. "And if it happens again?" The human's expression didn't change. "Then we'll be ready. Because in the end, peace is not maintained by words alone. It is protected. And as long as humanity walks among the stars, diplomacy will never be defenseless again."